Welcome to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. If you've ever been betrayed by a loved one, stayed up all night ruminating about broken promises, or keep thinking about the ways in which life or people you trusted have let you down, you may have struggled with the idea of forgiveness. The reason forgiveness is so important is that it is key to transforming anger and hurt into healing and peace. Forgiveness is what can help you overcome feelings of depression, anxiety, and rage, as well as personal and relational conflicts. It releases us from being stuck in the past instead of living in the present moment. Forgiveness is really about setting a prisoner free and discovering that that prisoner was you. Being able to forgive, to let go, and to move on really sounds easier said than done. But after hearing the personal stories of tonight's guests who have done this, or who teach others to forgive, you will find it hopefully much easier to do the same in 2021. First, it's my great pleasure to welcome author and speaker Nina Purewal. It was a devastating and unexpected childhood tragedy that inspired her mindfulness and meditation journey 20 years ago. After climbing the corporate ladder for nearly a decade, she took a sabbatical and moved to California to unplug and live in an ashram for a year. It's been her greatest passion to help others find happiness through adversity by leaning into ancient wisdom. With that, she founded Pure Minds, a company that conducts mindfulness and meditation workshops, and is the author of the international bestseller, Let That Stuff Go. Thank you so much for joining us, Nina.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. It's also my pleasure to introduce Dr. Eileen Boris, who specializes in international conflict resolution, mediation, negotiation, dialogue, and peace building. She's a highly regarded speaker, author, consultant, and trainer in the areas of forgiveness, conflict resolution, and the healing of nations. Dr. Boris has been invited to create and instruct peace-building programs in more than 15 of the most unstable and war-torn countries in the world. She has taught at some of the most prestigious universities in the world, including Thunderbird School of Global Management, where she works today. Dr. Boris has also delivered multiple addresses to the United Nations, has written 2 highly acclaimed books on the topic of forgiveness, and is writing a 3rd book on political forgiveness. Welcome to the show, Dr. Boris.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And finally, last but not least, Lana Burnley, who's a successful realtor and motivational speaker who is sharing her personal story of adversity and forgiveness with us tonight. At the age of 36, she was diagnosed with advanced breast cancer, then separated from her husband, who later killed himself. 10 years later, she was diagnosed with cancer again, married halfway through chemo, and 8 years later, her second husband asked for a divorce on Christmas Day. She made it through it all and is going to share how she did it and how you can do it too. Welcome, Lana. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to share my story and listen to what our other experts have to offer.
Your positive attitude is such an inspiration. Thank you for joining us tonight. I want to start the conversation by asking each one of you a question about your own personal journey to forgiveness and how it all started. I'd like to start with you, Nina. How did it all begin?
Thank you, Barbara. It's been quite the journey. And as you mentioned earlier in the intro, I did go through quite the tragedy over 20 years ago now. I was 16 at the time, and my parents were going through a pretty intense marital discord. And 6 months after my mom had served my dad divorce papers, I had gone to an appointment with my mother and came home. Our house was on fire, and my dad murdered my brother, my little brother, who was 5 years younger than me, and took his own life as well. And, you know, the detectives on the case said he planned to take me too, but fate had different plans. And for about 20 years, I completely did not acknowledge that he really was a part of my life until I realized that I was holding on to so much anger and resentment that I was suppressing and repressing. And so about 5 years ago, I went on a journey to forgive my dad because I realized my way to freedom and happiness and inner peace was to let go of all the things that I was holding on to with respect to that incident.
That's such a powerful story, and I want to hear more about some of the steps you took along the way to achieve that forgiveness. I think if you were able to forgive that, anyone could forgive anything. But I would like to go to our next guest, Dr. Boris. Tell us a little bit about political forgiveness and how you got into this area. Many of us have not heard of this, and it sounds very intriguing.
I've always enjoyed different cultures, and I grew up in a German Jewish family. And although we did not speak very much about the Holocaust and my father having to leave Germany, my aunt and uncle did share stories. And I remember as a young girl hearing about these stories about Crystal Knott and some of the things that they all went through. And I remember thinking, never again, this should never again happen to anyone. And I think this is what set the stage for me to become a psychologist. And then as the years went by, I began to study different spiritual disciplines, and so many of them kept talking about forgiveness. And I went and got my doctorate in psychology and heard about the field of political psychology. And as a result of that, I began to study and began to look into genocide and the factors that lead up to genocide. And again, I realized this has just got to stop. And I began to think about the principles of forgiveness that I was learning along the way, and was very intrigued about how can we apply this not only to individuals and teach individuals how to forgive, but how can we get groups of people to forgive, and how can we forgive nations, and how can we stop things such as the Rwanda genocide and heal from that so it never happens again. So I began to combine all of this knowledge and the research that I was doing and began to read a little bit about political forgiveness, and there's not a whole lot there. And I've just become really committed to understanding more of what it is and to develop more of the theories. And through my research in the countries I've visited, have seen how people have been getting involved in different aspects of political forgiveness. And now I really want to pull it together, which is why I'm writing that book on political forgiveness. And on my website, it really educates people as to the concepts that I understand behind what I'm hoping will eventually become some incentive and inspiration to develop a culture of political forgiveness.
It's an absolutely fascinating topic, and I'm excited to learn more about it during the show. But first, I want to hear from Lana. Tell us a little bit about the aha moment that got you to start, sharing your story, or got you to really turn your perception of your experiences around, because you're an incredibly positive person and your positivity just radiates from you. It's so contagious and infectious. But, this obviously didn't happen overnight. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
That's a very good point, Barbara, is that it didn't happen overnight. I think there were little pockets of aha moments throughout my journey that actually created this wonderful life or wonderful attitude I have now with regards to forgiving, for seeing the world in a different perspective. And it's about options, choices, right? You have a choice, live or die. Is there really a choice there? You want to live, right? I have a lot more to give to this world when you live. And by experiencing everything that I have experienced, I know others can learn from what I have experienced. And so they will understand that they're not alone. And the aha moment, I don't know. That's a very good question. Did it happen? It happened several times, I would say, because when you're looking back on things, you're saying, wow, how did that happen? How did I make it through that? Because I'll tell you, there were a lot of tears. There were some black clouds hanging over my head. But in the end, you realize this is all learning experience, and it's part of the journey that I can share.
I love
with
what you're
others.
saying. I love what you're saying, and my guess is that you've probably had more than one aha moment, and I can't wait for our viewers to get some of their own aha moments on the show tonight. We're just about to go to break, but when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about your journey and what led you to this place of acceptance and forgiveness. We'll be right back after the break.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Are you a woman experiencing abuse? Do you know a woman experiencing abuse? Help is available any time of day or night. Sheltersafe.ca is an online map that helps you find a women's shelter or transition house that meets your needs so you can live a life free from violence. Sheltersafe.ca. Help is just a click away.
Each week on Grill This, Smoke That, Steph Legary showcases delicious recipes from across Canada, all done on the grill. Join Steph and his special guests on Grill This, Smoke That, Fridays on Rogers TV.
Join us as we look back at previous investiture ceremonies honoring great Canadians. Watch the Order of Canada exclusively on Rogers TV.
Hi, welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and on tonight's show, we're discussing the topic of forgiveness, letting go, and moving on in 2021 with our wonderful panel of guests, Dr. Eileen Boris, Nina Purewell, and Lana Burnley. Thank you so much for joining us again tonight, ladies, with your spectacular insights, wisdom, and advice to offer to our viewers. Nina, I wanted to go back to your very powerful and touching personal story. You obviously had done a lot of work to get to the place that you're at today. Tell me a little bit about some of the insights and some of the myths that you dug through. Tell me a little bit about, you know, the way that journey looked like.
Absolutely. The first step for me was understanding that I needed to forgive because, as I said earlier, I blocked out so much and I didn't realize where all this anxiety and angst and anger was coming from until I had an aha moment from an article that I read where I realized I need to forgive my dad. My only way through this is to let go by forgiving my dad. And then I went through a very pragmatic approach on how to forgive. I started researching, I watched TED Talks, I read, and I took kind of a multifaceted approach to, you know, how do I actually forgive? So the first step was, you know, honoring all my emotions because I went through a 2-year process of researching and going through the motions. And then the first step I took from there was empathy. You know, I really dug into his past and into his childhood. And I asked a lot of questions and I wrapped my head around the fact that he probably struggled with mental health. And in the 90s, it was kind of taboo to have a psychologist. And it's not like, you know, as well versed and talked about today as mental health and therapy is. So he was, he never got any help. So he struggled mentally, and he was definitely a narcissist, and I think he might have had bipolar, and all of this undiagnosed and untreated. So that was kind of the first step, with empathy, and then just dealing with the pain and going through the motions of, I read a lot of Louise Hay. I don't know if you guys are Louise Hay fans, but she writes a lot about forgiveness. We had this activity where she said, say out loud, I forgive blank for blank. So I remember one night sitting up in my bed and just saying, I forgive you, Dad, for killing VJ, which was my brother's name, and saying it over and over again, and just crying out there and just releasing. So again, acknowledging that I had to forgive the first part, and then going through the motions. And again, I'll say that forgiveness is a very personal process. Everyone goes about it a different way, but the key is knowing that it's not about the other person. It's about you, because that's when I realized, I'm holding on to all this anger and resentment, but my dad, he's dead and gone. He's not being affected by it. I'm being affected by it. So when you forgive, it's not about, making up with the other person, or having a beautiful relationship after. You can forgive someone who's not in your life anymore, who's not alive anymore. But the key is knowing that it's not about that other person. It's about you.
When did you start believing it when you said out loud, I forgive you, Dad? How long did it take you to believe it?
It took me, like I said, 1.5 to 2 years to come to terms with it and believe it. And oddly enough, the universe works in interesting ways. I've reconnected with a girlfriend from, middle school who knew my dad. Most people don't know him. It was, pre-16. And she started telling me all these memories about, oh my gosh, your dad was so proud of you when you did this. Or I remember, when you came home with that report card or that comment, he was so happy. Or when he, coached your soccer team. And again, all these memories came flooding back, because for the 20 years that I suppressed it in my head, as soon as I thought about him, it was like monster, So it took quite a while. It took a lot of patience and, determination, but eventually I got to a place where, I can look at his picture and say, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. But I also think tragedies are sometimes our greatest blessings, because they make us who we are. So it was a bit of that bigger perspective as well.
Do you think that there's an element of love and forgiveness?
Absolutely. I think two things. You have to learn to love yourself first. And if you love yourself first unconditionally, then you have the capacity to love others that way. And I think it's tough to love someone who's betrayed you, who's hurt you, and you don't have to get to a point where you love them. But I think the more you can, that's where I came at with the empathy. I think the more you can put yourself in their shoes and say, hey, this is why we did this. We just couldn't handle a situation. Doesn't make it okay. But this is why they did this. It comes from a place of love. It has to.
Dr. Boris, you mentioned earlier that you've interviewed many people on forgiveness, and certainly that's what you do for a living. Tell me a bit about some of the trends that you've noticed, some of the interesting parallels that have popped up when talking to people about forgiveness, and how does that look different from culture to culture?
It's really interesting, and I really enjoyed just listening to Nina just now, because she really typified a lot of the steps of what people do go through. One of the first things that I do talk about in helping people learn how to forgive is for them to understand what forgiveness really means. And Nina alluded to it. It's about your own inner healing. It's about letting go of your own emotional baggage. It's not about letting somebody else off the hook. People will still be held responsible. And just because you forgive someone, it doesn't mean that you have to even be in a relationship with them, because it's about you letting go and working through your emotions. So that's one really important piece. And I do see forgiveness as really the highest form of love. which kind of brings me into your question about cultures. I've done a lot of work in Africa, for example, and we know in the Western traditional cultures, in Christianity, the message of Jesus is about forgiveness. Sometimes, though, people think about that as turning the other cheek. And forgiveness is hard work. It's not about turning the other cheek. It's about really healing your own emotional anger and all of that. In Africa, in many of the cases, in countries in Africa, for example, in South Africa, they have something called Ubuntu. And what that means basically is, I'm human because you're human. My humanity is a result of your humanity. And what that really means is that I will need to create as much harmony in terms of relationships and not allow vengeance, anger, or need for revenge to undermine it. And we've seen this get played out in, for example, the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, when people came forward and they were able to forgive their perpetrator for killing a family member or doing all these kinds of things that are really horrific. But when you understand part of their culture with the Ubuntu and recognize that they see interconnectedness as being extremely important, you can understand why they feel so strongly about forgiveness. And there's a story that I'd like to share. It's about a mother who wanted to, she was very upset. Her son was killed. It was part of the Guluktu 7, which is a very famous story and case in South Africa, where there were 7 young South African men who were ambushed by a force, and they were told that they were going to be trained, and the group that was going to train them was actually working for the Secret Service. And so they were killed. And when this came to the South African Commission, the mother met with one of the perpetrators. One of the perpetrators wanted to meet with all the mothers. And of course, the mothers were hysterical, and the perpetrator was sitting there and really talking about how he wanted to be forgiven. And finally, one of the mothers, the mother whose son, Christopher Pete, was killed, said, this reconciliation thing, if it means that I get my humanity back because I can forgive you, then I'm all for it. And it's very complex, because what she was saying is, the reason why you killed my son was because you lost your humanity. And now it's time, I forgive you, and you can get your humanity back because of this forgiveness. And then I become human again because I don't seek revenge. Then reconciliation and forgiveness is worth it. That's what we need. And that was the thinking behind a lot of the people who spoke in the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And you see this in other countries too, in Africa, that whole sense of interconnectedness and all of that.
There's a lot of beauty and wisdom in that story, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. We're just about to go to break, but when we come back, we'll be talking more about acceptance, letting go of what you can't control, and letting go, most importantly, of what people think of you. All that and more after we come back from the break.
Hi, I'm Harriet Clooney. Come check out my show, Scrap Cooking, where I'm going to show you how to use the bits and bobs, the ends, the pieces of things that you might otherwise throw in the compost. I'm going to show you how to turn them into something delicious.
Your mouth can do a lot of amazing things. And your mouth can save a life.
Hi, I'm Tom Wong. I'm just one of close to 1,000 Canadians in search of a stem cell match. We need your help.
A simple swab is all you need to register on the National Stem Cell Database. You could be the one to save a life. Find the hero in you.
After a night out with your friends, there's always options for getting home safely. You could call your BFF, your mom or dad, whoever you can count on for a safe ride home. You could call your favorite cab company or 1-888 taxi guy. Or you could use the Arrival Live smartphone app to help you choose your ride. Be it a friend, transit, or taxi, getting home safely is app easy. Now available for iOS and Android devices. Visit arrivallive.org to find out more. Arrival Live. Drive sober.
When you're online, Rogers TV on YouTube shares news and events from your community. Like messages from local leaders, updates on the latest health news, local business presenting their new offerings, and how our local communities are working their way through these unprecedented times. Visit and subscribe to Rogers TV on YouTube for the latest local information.
Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and on tonight's show, we're discussing how to forgive, let go, and move on in 2021. In the book, The Art of Forgiveness, Loving Kindness, and Peace by Jack Cornfield, the author describes an African forgiveness ritual practiced by the Babemba tribe of South Africa, where when a person acts irresponsibly or unjustly, he is placed in the center of the village alone. All the work stops, and every man, woman, and child in the village gathers in a large circle around the accused individual. Then each person in the tribe speaks to the accused one at a time, each recalling the good things that the person in the center of the circle has done in their lifetime. Every incident, every experience that can be recalled with any detail and accuracy is recounted. All their positive attributes, their good deeds, their strengths, their kindnesses are recited carefully and at length. And this is a tribal ceremony that often lasts for several days. At the end, the tribal circle is broken, a joyous celebration takes place, and the person is symbolically and literally welcomed back into the tribe. And this story, Eileen, reminded me of the stories that you had told us before we went to break, in terms of the acknowledgement of humanity and the love that is such a key element of forgiveness across cultures. I'm wondering, since you've worked in so many different countries and cultures, I'm wondering if you've seen forgiveness expressed in different ways from one culture to another. Forgiveness look very different in the Western world, for example, than it does in Eastern cultures.
You know, it reminds me again of something that it takes place in Sierra Leone, and it's called Fumble Talk. And Sierra Leone has gone through a very bloody civil war. And at first, people weren't going to be talking about having a chance to talk about what happened. They brought in the International Criminal Court and tried 4 cases. It cost a whole lot of money. And what the people really wanted was to speak directly to the perpetrators. Sierra Leone, their culture is about storytelling. And so what was developed was a man named John Coker, who is from Sierra Leone. He went around from village to village to find out what people really want. And the result of this was the emergence of what is now called Fumble Talk. And this is when the community, the village gets together and they decide that they're going to build a bonfire. And people, victims who want to speak, can come up and share their story and call on the perpetrator to come and tell their story. So you're hearing what's going on and you can get a sense of empathy. You know, for example, there was a woman who came and talked about being raped as 12 years old by her uncle. And when her uncle could speak, he said, I would be killed if I didn't do this, and how bad he felt. And then the community cheers and they celebrate and dance. They have a big ceremony welcoming the perpetrator back into the community, which is the most important thing for that community. It's not about having justice. It's not about this retributive justice that we see in the West. It's about making the community whole again. And that's really a piece of what political forgiveness is about. It's about helping individuals heal. It's about the restoration of community and creating a just political society. And this is the way that Sierra Leone did it. And then after the bonfire and the celebrations, they have projects where they work together. It could be a community farm that they all work together on, or other things, which brings the community back together and reweaves a new life. So this is one other way. And in other countries like Mozambique, they have something called the Gambian Spirits, where they go to traditional healers and the stories come out and the spirits come out, and there's a whole dance about the spirits. And it's usually the spirits of the dead soldiers, but you would think would be the perpetrators, but you also understand that they were victims too. So this is a whole different way. And it's just very interesting and fascinating to see how in each country, if you really speak to the indigenous people there, they have ways of forgiveness that work in their society, which is very different than the Western world. And this is also where something called restorative justice comes from, as opposed to retributive justice or transitional justice, where the victim and perpetrator do come together and there's a healing.
Yeah, and I think you sort of hit the nail on the head where you mentioned that these ways of forgiveness and restorative justice are what work within that particular society. And I want to do a deeper dive into that a little bit later in the show. But first, I want to go back to Lana, and I want to ask you, Lana, to tell us your story in greater detail, some of the lessons that you learned along the way, the aha moments that you had. I know that you've got sort of 9 major steps that you coach people on, achieving growth and impact on their life. And these steps are guided by your own life experiences. Tell us a little bit about what that's looked like for you.
Well, it's like I said, it's been a bit of a journey, but in order to continue on, I had to realize that there were choices. And, being diagnosed with locally advanced breast cancer at the age of 36, and it was very difficult to understand why me? Why did this happen? What did I do to create this disease growing inside my body? Because I didn't think I had never, ever smoked. I drink very little. And so what's going on here? And I've never been overweight, which are some of the bigger causes of cancer. And even age is one of them, but at 36, you haven't lived much of a life. So I had to start realizing that it wasn't necessarily my fault that this happened. Our entire environment, like Dr. Eileen was saying, in the Western environment, is very different than some of the environments around the rest of the world, where they don't see so many cases of breast cancer. And it's realizing that it's not necessarily my fault that this happened. It's a whole combination of things that create this issue. And it's the same with other people when they start doing things that really affect you. There's a lot more going on, right, in their mind that we have no clue about. And so we have to realize that it's not necessarily about me, it's also about them. And by forgiving them, I'm also realizing that I can forgive myself, because there's so many things going on that we don't understand, that we don't know about. And that was one of the biggest aha moments that I got out of my first diagnosis with cancer, and subsequently the separation from my husband, because this sort of thing, it changes your entire life. And for those of you who have gone through it, understand that your life changes, your schedule changes, everything revolves around you, chemo treatments, surgery, radiation, and all the long-term latent effects that happen too from this sort of thing. And so the separation from my first husband was devastating to begin with, and then to learn that I'm never going to see him again because he hung himself was probably, oh my God, what did I do? Like, again, I put it back on myself, not realizing until somebody else had said it to me. And it was work, it was self-work, and it was work with professionals like Nina and Dr. Eileen, when they said, you know what? There's something else going on with him. It wasn't you. How could it be you? You're not responsible for somebody else's life. Wow. Like, bam. Talk about aha moment, right? I didn't have to take responsibility for his death. And I'm thinking, okay, even though a lot of people did try to pin it on me, saying, you know, if you weren't separated, if you hadn't done this, if you hadn't had to drop everything to take you to chemo treatments and cancer and, you know, hold the bucket while you could, you know, throw up and things like that. And I'm thinking, no, it's till death do us part, but it was also in sickness and in health. So those vows mean a lot, right? So it's accepting the other person and their past and their history, as well as accepting yourself. And you know what? We're okay. We're pretty cool. In the long run, we just realized that we're okay. And just like what Dr. Eileen was saying, we're all human and we're all part of humanity. And that's what makes it so great. We are all different. And that's why we have people up in space, because I'll tell you, I'm never going to be a rocket scientist, but I can sure help people buy and sell houses, or I can help people realize that they're not responsible for what somebody else does to them. They're obviously going through some bigger issues. Something to remember, you know? Goodness, what else have we got there?
I want to ask Nina, since you have been able to find forgiveness for your father, have you found it easier to forgive others as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, nothing comes close to comparing to that incident and the betrayal I felt and the PTSD and the survivor's guilt and the way he murdered my brother was quite traumatic. And I saw the crime scene after the bodies were taken away. But, you know, nothing in my life has compared to. So absolutely, once I kind of moved through that, and I have to say, it's not black and white. It's not like he doesn't trigger me anymore, or, you know, thoughts of anger don't come up anymore. They just, when I'm triggered, I'm affected less. I can overcome it more quickly, or I can breathe through it, or they don't trigger me with the same intensity. So nothing really in life has compared. That's where the perspective has come in, is that, you know, if I've ever been betrayed by anybody else in my life, it's easy to kind of move through.
Do you ever want revenge? Do you think it's okay? Is it natural for humans to want, maybe revenge is too strong of a word, but retribution for something bad that's happened to them? I mean, is it natural for people to want to see good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, or is that too black and white? How do you feel about that sort of very simplistic model, I guess, of good guy versus bad guy?
Absolutely. I think it's totally fair to want, you know, revenge, even if you will, the nightmares I had after the incident, and even the visualizations. I had quite a bit of therapy because I would have visualizations of what I wanted to do to my dad, because I was so angry, especially those first few years. Again, I was a teenager and I was going through those formative years, and it's hard enough being an awkward teenager as it is. So to process that on top of it was quite challenging. But I absolutely think it's natural to have those thoughts. No one should ever feel bad or guilty to have those thoughts. But again, it goes back to when that thought comes up of, you know, a revenge, or, you know, wanting to do something back, you know, of the same magnitude. It's affecting you, not affecting the other person. So again, it's the acknowledgement of the thought and then knowing how it's affecting you. And, you know, at the end of the day, just knowing that you cannot control the people around you. And, for me, it was as long as I'm a good person and I'm, walking a path that is righteous to me and that is honorable to me, then, I can't control anybody else or anything else around me, really.
Now, you've written a best-selling book called Let That Stuff Go, and you also have a masterclass coming up. You teach people to let go of what they can't control, and I want to hear more about that after we come back from the break. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this.
All I wanted was to see a movie. One down, please.
I can't sell downstairs tickets to you people.
How dare they? I could afford to buy the more expensive ticket. I run my own business. But they refused to take my money. They left me there all night. On what charge? They said I didn't pay the theater tax. But it was really about color.
Sister Desmond, appeal this conviction and your community will stand behind you.
Do you have any idea what this will do to us?
So what are you going to do? Make it right.
Viola Desmond's case inspired Nova Scotia's civil rights movement. She was pardoned 63 years later based on the injustice of her conviction.
He fell. Whoa, I'm not driving. I'm way too stoned. How are you feeling, beer?
Oh, since we had that talk, I'm not driving tonight at all.
What about you, Dave?
You only had a couple of drinks.
And only a couple of puffs.
I don't drink and drive. No way I'm getting behind the wheel when I smoked weed, too.
How are we getting home, then?
Oh, you can drive, Dave.
Come on, Dave.
Take one for the team, buddy.
Don't let weed and alcohol influence your decision to drive.
Yeah, I need a ride.
Each week on Grill This, Smoke That, Steph Legary showcases delicious recipes from across Canada, all done on the grill. Join Steph and his special guests on Grill This, Smoke That, Fridays on Rogers TV.
Hi, welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and on tonight's show, we're talking about forgiveness, letting go and moving on in 2021. Nina, before we went to break, we were talking a little bit about your book, your international bestseller, Let Stuff Go, and also about the fact that you have a masterclass coming up to teach other people some of these concepts. Tell us a little bit about the mindfulness and meditation work that you've done. I guess a lot of it started in the ashram that you spent time in California. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is my book, the Let That Stuff Go, and I have gone through a lot of therapy, but the one thing that has always kept me grounded is, the ancient wisdom and the mindfulness and meditation practice. And I've realized how much we are all in our own heads. We think on average 60,000 thoughts a day, so that translates to 35 to 42 thoughts a minute. And our minds are constantly going. We are actually aware of less than 1% of those thoughts. I'm sure you've all been in a situation where you're physically somewhere, whether it's sitting in a meeting or doing dishes, but mentally you're somewhere else. And this happens all the time. So mindfulness is all about being aware of your mind that is wandering and bringing it back to the present moment. I think there's a bit of a misconception that mindfulness happens 24/7. Someone who is mindful is always in the here and now. And that's not the way it works, especially in the crazy world that we live in. For me, it's about being aware of how many times our mind is wandering off, catching it and bringing it back to the present moment. It's a very, very powerful tool to be aware of what is going on in there and kind of working through it by that awareness.
And where can people sign up for your masterclass?
My masterclass is a 12-week course. It's on Udemy. It is, we've got 24 lectures 12 self-assessment sheets and 14 meditations. So if you go to Udemy and you put in Nina Purewall, my course will come up. It's all about mindfulness and meditation and learning how to let go.
That's fantastic. I'm definitely going to sign up. I want to go back to Dr. Eileen Boris. Now, you've written a book as well, and it goes into the 7 steps for forgiveness. Take us through what those steps are, and how do you work with your clients on their path to forgiveness? What are some of the questions that you ask or the reflection that you ask them to undertake?
The first step talks about helping people understand what forgiveness is, because most people do not really understand what it means. And we talk about that, and we talk about the need for revenge, and that revenge is a natural impulse. And I have people go through writing their revenge stories and really getting into it, because I want them to really get into their anger. And then I ask them, is this going to get you what you really want? And of course, the answer is no. And when they get to that place, then I say, I think we can talk about another way of doing this. And so I have people in step 2 really talk about their story, and not to be ashamed about what happened or afraid, and really provide a safe container for them to share their story and get into the emotions of it, because so much goes underground and is repressed. And we work through the anger, we work through the fear, we work through the guilt, which is a very strong emotion. And eventually we also have to go through the mourning of loss, of whatever it is. It could be the death of someone you loved. It could be of innocence. It could be, the list is never ending. And when people are able to get through that, then we talk about, as both Nina and Lana have talked about, walking in somebody else's shoes, understanding the psychological landscape where they came from. And Nina said it beautifully, talking about her father. Okay, he was bipolar, he was this, he was that. And when you begin to understand that, and him not getting treated, he was living, his whole, it was really awful for him. And when you can understand that, it's not that you don't hold people accountable, but at least when you can understand where they've come from, it's a lot of times enough to disarm their anger. And then from then, we reframe and create a different story of what really happened. And ultimately, and this is what I've seen so often with the people I've worked with, there is that special moment, that spiritual gift, depending on, again, what culture you come from, where there's this inner transformation that's been working too long because of the healing you've done. And that's why you'll see people maybe start nonprofit organizations in the name of their son who was murdered or whatever. And that's when there's a real transformation. And that's the real difficult work of forgiveness. It's very transformative when you really understand the interconnectedness. So I do write about that. I do have this book, 7 Steps, I don't know if you can see it, to Finding Forgiveness, which really goes into it, which has visualizations in it, rating scales in it, and things that you can do to really help you get through it. And I use that for some of the individual work. And when I do international work, I do something with Schools of Forgiveness, which is a whole other thing, which not only looks at individual forgiveness, but also looks at issues of social justice as well.
When is it okay to, fight for yourself? Like, when is it okay to demand retribution? Let's say, for instance, someone has wronged you and you take them to court, for instance. How do you know when it's okay to defend yourself, whether it's a battle worth fighting or when you should just let it go and walk away? I guess it's a really individual thing, but is there sort of a general rule or a guideline you can follow to answer that question within yourself?
I think this is where the inner work is very important, because if something's done to you, people need to be held responsible. Now, the real difference is if you're able to forgive, you might use the same words, but the motivation is different. You might be able to say to the person who may have murdered someone, you need to take responsibility, you need to be in jail, whatever it is. but in your heart of hearts, that it's not coming from a place of anger. It's coming from a place of understanding and empathy. And you're taking the scissors away from the kid so that person cannot hurt anybody else anymore. And so that's really the guidepost. It's the inner healing. And again, forgiveness is about your inner healing. It's not about what you do outside of that. It will guide you in how to go forward about the actions you need to take. And of course, people need to be held responsible. And of course, if you are in an abusive relationship, you need to get out of Dodge. You need to be able to take care of yourself. It's what goes on within yourself and the healing which will determine how you respond.
That makes perfect sense. I want to ask Lana, what keeps you strong? You've obviously been through a lot. You've got a great attitude, very positive. How do you keep yourself, I guess, from sliding into negativity or old patterns of thoughts? What kind of keeps you on the right path?
Well, thank you very much for asking, Barbara, because I actually have 5 steps that I work through. And believe it or not, mindfulness, what Nina was talking about before, is very much part of the whole process, because realizing I'm here, I'm there, I'm, still standing, it feels good to be alive. But when you open your heart to sharing, just like I'm doing now, you feel good that possibly somebody is going to take a nugget from everybody, everything that we have all said tonight, and they're going to realize that too, they are not alone. Somebody has had their house burnt down by, a close family member. Somebody has had somebody murdered by a close family member. You're not alone. Other people have experienced this and they know how to get through it. If they've gotten through it, it's a very good chance you can get through it if you ask for help. And that's another thing. You have to realize you have to ask for help. And if you don't ask for help, you are going to be left alone. And we as individuals do not have the history ourselves to cope with all of this. That's why we have experts, right? Take control by taking action. And when you take action, it means you are going to talk to somebody about it. You are going to share what you have just been through. You are talking to professionals. Okay, let's take it one step further, just very little. When you are going through chemo, you lose your hair through some of the chemos, right? Get up, get dressed, and actually put on a wig and look at yourself and be proud of who you are in the mirror. Make yourself, when you look good, you feel good on the inside. And that's a step to keep going. And realize that you're not alone. You have choices. You do have choices no matter what's going on in your life. I do have a degree in psychology too, believe it or not, Dr. Eileen. And so I understand what's going on in the mind. And our minds are very powerful things. They can control a lot. And we can control what our mind is thinking because our past does not equal our future. Our past is simply part of who we were and part of our journey and what we're learning from. And like Nina and myself and Dr. Eileen, we have learned a lot in our past. And from that, we move to our future and become better people for it. And by this, we are helping other people. Our little soft underbellies are being exposed. And that means other people can expose their little soft underbellies too.
Have you processed a perceived betrayal, let's say, by life or by your body? Why am I getting cancer at 36? It doesn't make any sense. Do you process that kind of betrayal or forgive that kind of betrayal differently than a betrayal by like another human being, for instance?
Very good question. I think I do, because when you're talking about another human being, it's outside of your control. Right? And these people, they have other things going on that I don't know about. I know my own history and I know what I've been exposed to. And just because I got cancer twice, well, almost 3 times, I know what has I've been exposed to, and I know that, hey, I'm not going to do that anymore. This was my own learning experience, but I can't control. So I'm controlling myself and what I'm doing, but I can't control what this other person is doing. So I've got to forgive them right away. I don't know their history. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they've been through. And it's probably a shame too. It's nothing I can do about it. But when I do have control over myself, it's perfect.
Really good point. Thank you so much for sharing. We just have a couple minutes left until the end of our time together, and I wanted to end the show by asking Dr. Boris a very high-level question. If you have any thoughts on how the United States can heal and find forgiveness. We all sort of, the entire world was watching the results of the election, was very interested, very engaged. And as a political psychologist, I'm interested in hearing, your perspective on what happened and what you anticipate will happen in the future.
I think we've got so much division in this country that it's not just about the political divisions. There's racism, there's all kinds of things. And I think we have to start introducing, well, first of all, I think COVID may actually be helping in this regard, because there are people and communities coming together and learning about compassion and empathy for one another. We've got to start bringing that back into the equation. And then there have been some novel things that people in communities are doing. And it reminds me of one story of the work that the Equal Justice Initiative is involved with in healing racism. The whole idea is to get dialogue, to get people aware of how our past is influencing our present. And so what they've done is, one of their projects was develop a legacy museum, and they're working on issues of racism. And the Legacy Museum was, it's a building that used to be for slave trade. And you go into the museum now, it's very interactive. People go in and you're walking as though you were a slave, and you trigger sensors and you hear the conversations that people are having about how they were taken away from their family and how they're being sold, and on and on. And one of the projects is about lynching, where they've taken jars and filled it up with dirt. And they go to the places where people have been lynched, and they fill up the dirt, and they bring the jars back with the history. And there's a whole section about that.
Well, I'm sorry, I have to cut you off. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Boris, for sharing your research. Really fascinating field of work. And to you both, Lana and Nina, thank you so much for sharing very powerful stories, for all your wisdom and insights on the show tonight. Our viewers are very lucky to benefit from your wisdom in their own journey to forgive. And if you're watching this tonight, thank you so much for watching. Have a great evening. We'll see you again next week.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Join us as we look back at previous investiture ceremonies honoring great Canadians. Watch the Order of Canada exclusively on Rogers TV.
My name is Matthew Rutledge. I'm a 60 Scoop survivor, born in Red Lake. Was adopted from there to Toronto at the age of 4. A lot of our brothers and sisters, family members, got separated from each other. That was the government's goal, to break that connection from brothers and sisters. Basically taking the Indian out of the child. Right now, they're still trying to find themselves. Originally, my birth name is Harvey Halverson. In my high school days, teens, I was trying to fit into society. I knew I was First Nations, but I didn't know who I was inside. I think later in life, I started that journey. I am proud, and it's not my man, who I am now. I love life, who I am.
Hi, I'm Harriet Clooney. Come check out my show, Scrap Cooking, where I'm going to show you how to use the bits and bobs, the ends, the pieces of things that you might otherwise throw in the compost. I'm going to show you how to turn them into something delicious.
This is